Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is November 26, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. We also want to thank Sweeney's Pharmacy and their Finnegan's Wake reading group. That's how I met Zoe Patterson, our guest today. Zoe, where in the heck you calling in from?
I'm in Dublin right now.
How cool is that? The first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
What is the best thing? Going outside.
Dad, going outside. I like that. That we could take that literally and metaphorically. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
I don't know. I'd say maybe through reading, but I'm not sure on that. It's such a different experience getting it through reading and then, getting it, live from other people through speaking. But I don't know. I think something about the act of reading and what it entails, I really enjoy. So.
Did you become a reader, one, because your parents told you to, two, because they did it as an example, or three, on your own?
I don't know. I would say, so I can't really say any of the three exactly, because like my family was very, from what they've told me and from the, early memories, because obviously, memory when you're young is not great. But, from everything I understand about like before I started, kindergarten and all that, my family was very on top of sort of teaching me to read before I like got into the proper school system. So I thankfully got an early start with it. So it was kind of my parents telling me, but at the same time, it was never something I felt was like pushed on me. So I wasn't feeling like I was being told to do it. I kind of just liked it from the start. So I'd say it's a kind of something I came to on my own in that sense, that like I didn't feel like I was being told to go to it. Yeah. But I was, still led there in a certain way.
Well, thanks. That's you're a great listener, because most people, the way I word it is, some people want to take pride and go, "Well, I became who I am on my own." But
no one does, though.
You say it again.
No one becomes who they are on their own, though.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so then they don't realize, we met through Finnegan's Wake, that reading Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people is exactly what most parents do to their kids. Immediately they read a text and the kid looks at the text and hears the words. So it's not just a seeing experience, it's a hearing the parent pronounce the word. And you might not even know how the word is, but you're hearing the parent pronounce the word. So it's good how you listen. I love that. No one said, well, I don't think it's any of those three, because, when I give you these options, like, is it more this or more that? It doesn't mean those are the only two things. That's the beauty. You took it beyond. But why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I think it's a way of connecting with other people, and because we need other people to survive, that just sort of the want to collect information comes naturally, because I think through interacting with people you learn, and also through interacting with people you're also teaching each other in a way, and to be able to teach each other you need to have information to provide. So yeah, I think it's, and I think it also, it helps us understand ourselves, but it also helps us understand everyone around us. And I think, I think that's sort of essential to survival, is sort of, both being able to understand yourself and the people around you.
And the people. That was good. And you sort of answered this, you implied it. Is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
I think the basic need is innate, but I think what the specific kinds of information that we feel the need to collect and the specific ways in which we feel the need to collect it are somewhat invented in certain ways. We're sort of, we sort of decide as a society like what is important to know and what isn't, and what are the acceptable ways of getting that information. So I think we've taken this sort of innate need that we have and sort of, enhanced it with kind of invented aspects, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Do thoughts create emotions?
I think it happens both ways. I think sometimes thoughts create emotions and sometimes emotions create thoughts. And I think the thoughts that are created by emotion and the emotions that are created by thoughts are like somewhat of different calibers in terms of how they feel, how it feels to experience them. I don't really know how to describe the difference, but it just feels different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fill in the blank, Zoe. I don't know what I think until I
rant to someone about it for at least 30 minutes.
rant for 30 minutes. That sounds like me. Yeah.
Yeah,
I need at least 30 minutes to rant. No, rant is such a great word. Go ahead. You're going to.
Yeah, I don't know if it's exactly 30 minutes, but I feel like a lot of things, will just stew in me as sort of this abstract blah of thought and feeling. And then when I finally find someone who is willing to let me just, projectile rant at them, then it sort of comes together, because when I hear it aloud, then I can sort of say, oh, I can assess it better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Assessing, that's good. Now, I really want to do the etymology on the word rant, because rant kind of holds this I don't know if it's a negative thing, but I think ranting is good, but ranting can be vicious. And so it can turn people. I talked to this guy the other day, and he doesn't always listen. I just kind of raised my voice a little, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, "You don't have to yell at me." And I was trying to stress, like, dude, you never listen, so I'm going to try. And it didn't work. It flipped the opposite. But, Bob Dylan has a great line I love to repeat that he claims he got from the Bible is, "Don't ever tell anyone everything you know." Like if me and you met at a party and we go, "Oh, you read Finnegan's Wake," and we started I would want you to tell me everything you know about the Wake, and you might want to know everything I know, and we would say it's like a rant. You're like, you get overexcited. But it was like McLuhan says, "I don't know what I think until I say it," and Joe Didion says, "I don't know what I think until I write it." So can humans think without language?
Yes, but it's a very different kind of thinking, and it's not a kind of thinking that I think we would understand.
Wow. Chomsky says that a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
What do I do? Realistically, I usually just sort of detach and shut down and distract myself.
Yeah.
Which is not really the healthy way to deal with it. But I think it's the way I deal with it, and I think that's the way a lot of people deal with it too. Yeah. I think when you feel the need to sort of isolate and detach from a situation, from the outside world, whatever, you can often trace it back to a failure of language in some form or another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
I'd be inclined towards feeling, like somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, but like a bit closer to feeling, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, no, 80% say more feeling. I mean,
Mhm.
but it's funny because I think feeling and thought are so connected that you
Mhm.
can't really separate them. But because we invented the word feeling and thinking, then we think we can separate them.
Yeah, I think we aspire to be thinking beings. I feel like there's so many people who really pride themselves in either being, objective or rational, and they're going off the assumption that their ideas and feelings aren't fueled by emotion in any way, and they're going off the premise that it's possible to separate those two things.
Yeah,
And I would argue it's not. But I
it's
think we
not.
like to tell ourselves it is because we like to, think we're stronger than our emotions.
Yep. And the funny thing is most people go, are we more feeling or thinking? They literally go, I think we're more feeling.
Yeah.
Okay, these are two questions from the 50s, Alan Turing.
Okay.
Is is thinking a function of the soul?
Um, I don't I don't know because I've never been one to actually to believe in a soul as, people believe in souls. Um, but I would have to say if souls do exist in the way that we think they do, which I am not sure if that's the case. If they do exist, then I would say yes, but that's, only if they exist. So,
The second Turing question is, can machines think?
um, I hope not.
That's good. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I think happiness, because I think like I find meaning in happiness. And I think to pursue meaning is to pursue happiness. So I think I just, cut out the middleman and pursue happiness and the meaning falls into place.
That's cool, but Viktor Frankl wrote a book called
Mhm.
Man's Search for Meaning, and he says happiness doesn't tend to last, meaning does.
Well, I think, yeah, I agree that happiness doesn't last, but I think uh, happiness in and of itself doesn't last, but you can get to a sort of state where you have, enough of those sort of happy moments in life, um, where you can sort of hold on to those in moments of, not being happy.
Yeah.
And being able to do that is where you find meaning, if you're
Yeah.
having like a crap day, being able to, think about the things that make you happy, even though those things may not be present at the moment, that can give you meaning. So I think it's not, I don't think it's like you're happy all the time and there's the meaning. I think it's, you can always believe that it exists for you, even if it's not
Yeah.
happening in that moment.
It's good. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
Um, I honestly have no idea. I would hope creating. I don't know why I hope
Yeah.
creating. Yeah, at least the way that I like perceive like how my brain works, I would lean towards creating, but I don't know anything about how like the science of that actually works or anything.
But, Zoe, that's what I'm after, your hunch, because
Mhm.
sometimes people go, well, I'm not a neuroscientist. I goes, well, that's all right. Just your hunch. So that was good. If you want it to be there. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Um, Again, another guess, speed of thought.
That's all right. There's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one
Mhm.
you got right.
Oh, wow, okay.
No, this is Audre Lorde, the poet. You can't
Mhm,
dismantle the master's house using
mhm.
the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded and said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
New tool do I suggest? Oh, Hmm. I don't really know. I feel like the very current answer is to say the internet,
Yeah.
because I think that's been the tool of, it very much is like the tool of the master these days. And I hope, like, I have hope that, like, that is a tool that, people can reinvent and make it a better thing. But I don't know if that's possible based on the sort of infrastructure we have on it now. But that's the tool I would maybe say.
Yeah.
You know,
In what new toy do you suggest?
what new toy? Hmm. Not a new toy, but I'd just say language.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it's a very fun thing where you can always mess it up in new ways. It's always changing and growing in new ways, so it's a very old thing that is always very new. Um, and especially connecting it to the internet, just like, as someone who's very online, just seeing the way that language changes online in online spaces, like from month to month almost, it seems now. I think
Well,
it's
this
yeah.
is really good, Zoe, because it's me and you versus the wording on the question. So just because I said new, you can say, well, I don't want to say new. It's the, what's probably the oldest tool ever is language, or could be one of the oldest toys
Mhm.
or tools ever. And that was good. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Um, Everything I didn't do that day, and then if I have something out of the ordinary I need to do the next day, then that. But it's usually everything I didn't do that day,
Yeah.
even if I was very productive that day.
Well, I make a list, and then if I lose my list, I get the day off.
Oh, wow.
But then if I start a new list for the next day, I say first thing I say find old lists, of things to do. Marshall McLuhan learned from a poet that artists are the antenna of the race. They're
Mm,
broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Zoe, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
um, Out of just like psychological survival, I think there's, on the day to day, only so much we can handle thinking about.
Yeah.
And if you fully sort of reckon with every sort of deep bit of, life all at once, like you won't be able to do anything. And I think that, the way artists broadcast that to us, I think it's, they're never broadcasting all of it at once, and it's in a way that is palatable to enough of an extent. Not palatable in the sense that it, makes you feel comfortable about everything, because obviously art often does not do that, but it makes it like something you can process. Um,
That was good. Do artists have moral obligation?
um, I think it depends on, what you mean by moral. I think they have like the same moral obligations that any other person has, because I don't think, obviously not everyone creates art, but artists are also not divine, perfect beings who are better than the rest of us. So I think they have sort of the same moral obligations as the rest of us do living in society. But I think it really depends on, I think it depends on the kind of art they're making, the context in which they're making it, that kind of stuff too. I think depending on, what you're creating and how you're creating it and the context you're creating it in, that can, garner sort of new levels of moral obligation. but it's not sort of a set thing, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. And my friends brought up ethics. What's the difference between ethics and morals?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I've always kind of wondered. I know there's a difference. I know, like, if you look in the dictionary, there's probably a difference. But yeah, I feel like ethics just seem like applied morals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Applied morals. Okay, so are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Old ideas, but like new applications of old ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
So I feel like what I always respond to with sort of like an earliest memory question is that I don't have a specific earliest memory, but I do have sort of like a set of conditions in my life that I know my memory started at. I know the earliest age I can remember is 3 years old. I know I moved around a bunch of times as a kid, and I know like the earliest house that I can remember,
Right.
that kind of stuff. So I have sort of like parameters of like, this is when memory started for me, but I don't have like, oh, I remember on this day this happened kind of thing. It's just, I have a general sense of when it, flipped on for the most part.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
I'd say not 100%, but I'd say more a curse.
Wow, I'm so everybody says blessing, and a guy said curse the other day, like lackadaisical. He goes curse, and I was like, wow, because I mean, the great Joyce line, remember to forget.
Yeah. I do have a reason.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I think it's sort of a kind of a curse for everyone, and it's to a certain level, no matter sort of what your memories are, because I think on the sort of more obvious scale of even if you've had a pretty good life, we all have like a certain amount of bad memories.
Yeah.
And those sort of those implant themselves on you in a variety of ways. But I think on the flip side too, good memories and the dangers of nostalgia. I think, a little bit of nostalgia is healthy. Obviously, it's, like I was saying before, it's good to sort of hold on to like, the happy moments in life. But there's like a danger in just sort of retreating into that and sort of, always like living in the past. And so that in that sense, it can kind of feel like a blessing, but it's kind of a curse because you sort of forget to live forward and you
For
just
the
live
moment.
backward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hold on 1 second. Sorry. We got a hectic household here for a second, but that's an amazing divert I'd love to go into for a second, because is archiving more innate or more invented? And what you just said sets that up the way I set the question up, because you work in research and all these books about Joyce, and being able to study in a university is important to you, and it's been important to me. But if Baba Ram Das is correct in saying be here now, live in the moment, in this sort of counter Joyce, Wyndham Lewis says artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future. Why do we have to preserve anything? Why should we care about what happened? We're trying to live in the present. So is this need or want to archive more innate or more invented?
Well, I would say invented, because I do agree that it's important to live in the present and like live for the future too. But if you don't remember at all how you got there, then you're not working with a lot. As I think going back to the idea of like nostalgia and memory being sort of a curse in a way, it's like it's sort of like a necessary curse. Like you can't get too lost in it, but you also can't totally abandon it, because forgetting how you got to where you are is just going to hold you back in a myriad of ways.
Well, we don't know, because somehow whoever created us, or however humans are made, a lot of us go into dementia and in Alzheimer's at the end of our lives, and we like, oh, that's horrible. It's like, no, maybe it's like you don't have to worry about paying bills and all that crap anymore. You're just like a kid again, and you're living in the moment. So it's sort of like you return to your child innocence, but we've sort of made it, oh, it's horrible, you lose your memory. But, you know, I think there's a funny little complex, you know, paradox to all of this.
Yeah.
You saying memory is more a curse was amazing, because of course it's a blessing. In the, you know, the word more is the tricky. A woman told me about a year ago, I asked her, is it more this or more that? She goes, the word more doesn't function in your question. Because of course it's both, and it depends.
Yeah.
It's always forever more. But I'm just using these sort of statements as prompts to get us to have a discussion. So I'm not like holding you. Like my mom said, if you ask me all these questions one day, I might answer them differently the next day. I goes, that's okay. You know. So Zoe, tell me someone within your immediate family, and then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
So I'd say in my immediate family, I this may be oversharing, I don't know. But I'd say, so I have one of my parents I have a very like wonderful relationship with. The other one I haven't talked to in a very long time. And so I'd say they kind of function for me as role models in separate ways. Because one of them has been a very positive role model in terms of, how to deal with life and difficulty and all that. And the other one has been a role model in showing me how not to live life, and how not to function. And so I think, sort of having that dynamic in my life, I was sort of, shown like these are sort of two ways you can be. And I've sort of, figured out which one is the positive role model and which one is the negative role model.
Yeah.
So I said, I don't know if negative role model is a thing, but a reverse role model, whatever, whatever.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. I always say, like, if your parents and alcoholics, say, do you get alcoholism from the DNA, or do you get it from seeing that they're having a good time, or you're learning not to be an alcoholic because you saw that it might have brought damage to their life? So that, we don't know how, like you're saying, what is, when I say impact, I'll tell you the weirdest thing once. This woman heard more impact than role model. I said, who gave you the biggest impact growing up? And she said, Hitler. Now, she didn't mean Hitler as a good thing. She said it when she's much older than us. She was saying that had a huge impact on me, this character in the world. So she heard the word impact, a little more, she just stressed impactful. So it is funny. Now, did your parents raise you a particular religion?
No. They were both not religious, and the parent who's more of a positive role model was always very sort of just himself, not very into organized religion in general, and sort of imparted that onto me as a kid. So I sometimes say I'm raised atheist, but I know atheist is a strong word, because I'm kind of the feeling that if there was ever proof of a higher power existing, then I'm open to that being the case.
Do you pray?
I don't. I want to say I don't, because I don't pray in a religious way. Again, like, I was raised non-religious. I do have Jewish heritage, and I have sort of, started to become more interested in that as I get older, but more in a cultural way, less in a religious way.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say that I don't pray at all, because I don't pray in a religious sense, but I feel like I sort of, I don't know how to describe it, but I kind of almost, I feel like I sometimes will engage, not really sort of in a secular form of trying to will things into existence mentally. And it sort of feels like I'm, praying to no one almost, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
If God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Um, just tell me I like did okay,
Yeah.
Just like not even like great, just like okay.
That's good.
Enough,
Okay is
you
great.
know.
No, 80% of people go, you did it. They want God to say you did a good job. I mean, literally, a lot of people say that.
Yeah,
But
I mean, it'd be great, but like just okay is fine with me too.
okay is great. It's like, but one of my favorite was the guy goes, well, I checked here and we're going to send you back. That's what he do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Um, well, I think part of my answer has to involve the fact that like evil is a subjective thing to a certain extent. Like there's obviously sort of a level of evil that we baseline as a society have agreed upon is evil. There's certain things that we as people just like generally agree it's bad to do. But then there's, going beyond that, there's sort of everyone has certain things that they personally consider evil that other people might not. So this is all in that subjective sense. But I think I don't want to say that evil uses people as a vehicle, because that removes responsibility from people.
Yeah.
Because I think, when people do evil things, there are factors that often create that are sort of outside their control. But I think ultimately the blame is not always 100% on those outside factors. And then I think if we always see evil as sort of, its own thing that's just sort of possessing people, I think that takes away, the responsibility they have and, what they've chosen to do, kind of thing.
Very
So,
really good. Zoe, what's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
um, I think rights are things you have, and responsibilities are things you need to do, or that, like, the ways you need to be.
Yeah, it's good. The real question is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? So I'll set up with a few modern thinkers. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So basically it's the question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first,
Mhm.
how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Um, I think, and this is gonna sort of sort of reflects my feelings on enemies and dealing with them in general, is that sometimes that's the case, but sometimes it's not.
Yeah,
I think that, I think the main thing is that, like, dealing with an enemy, it all depends on sort of the context,
yeah.
of, why that relationship exists. And so I don't think there's like one specific way that one can deal with an enemy that will always work every time. Um, you know.
Well, there's Nassim Taleb has an interesting quote. He
Mhm.
says that let me see if I can find this. Games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't really know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. Then my friend said, well, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. And Gregory Bates, an anthropologist, says if the criminal gets caught, does he go, oh, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, wow, I did something morally and socially wrong?
Mm.
So again, it's a lot of prompts, but the basic question is, does punishment work?
I don't know. I think the way, I mean, I'm not living in the US right now, but I'm obviously from there. I think the way we do it, in the US, in terms of the, prison industrial complex, that's not working. But I think punishment is something that can exist in a variety of different forms, and maybe that there is some form of punishment out there that is effective, that is ultimately good for us as a society. But whatever it is, I don't know if we're currently implementing that, or if we know what it is. So I'm inclined to say no to the ways that we currently engage in punishment, but it doesn't mean that there aren't new ideas around what punishment looks like. That could be,
Yeah, that's amazing. No one ever says the prison industrial complex. Bravo to you. That is so evident in America. I mean, it's probably evident across the world, but it's like that is huge.
Yeah.
Okay, so James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin over 100 years ago, and he basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Because I think it gives you access to a new perspective of seeing things that like you wouldn't be able to access just through living life. I think not only through, the fact that you're seeing work created by an artist who sees the world differently than you, but also through the medium too. I think, I think putting real life into, the medium of film or into literature like that, into an artificial medium, I think that creates a new perspective in and of itself. I think, like writing fiction myself, like even though when I'm writing, it's obviously coming from my perspective because I'm writing it, but then when it's, when it's in the form of written fiction, it is still something new to me. It does still show me like a new way of seeing things because, it is inherently, the written word is an inherently different sort of thing than, the human brain. So, it just helps you to process and see life in a new way, which I think is good for us as like a species,
Good for us. So here's two quotes about art.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious your reaction. Mike Kelly said, making art is making your problems other people's problems. Any thoughts on that line?
I love it. I do love when artists make their problems my problems. Again, we're talking about we talked about ranting before and sort of connecting with other people. And I think, art it's this very interesting way of connecting with other people. And I think the thing with art too, you can connect with people who you'll never meet, who lived at a completely different time than you. And you can still have that sort of sense of humanness between you and this person that you'll never meet. And so, yeah, I do love when artists make their problems my problems. I'm like, tell me about it. I want to know what it's like, like.
That is good. John Lennon said when he read Finnegan's Wake, he felt like he was talking to a friend. Isn't that cool? I love that one.
Yeah.
And so this is a poet, Fanny Howe.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious your reaction to this. The point of art is to show people that life is worth living by showing that it isn't.
Yeah, I agree with that largely too. Like I think, in sort of, taking your own issues and gunk and problems and all that, and sort of putting it into this new thing. There's sort of this like beauty and the ability to create something that is, seen as meaningful, worthwhile, even if it's just by yourself, out of sort of the badness of life. It's it's sort of the good element of all the bad things in life is that you can create something new out of it. And I think, like, creating is something that, I think it's good for us as people. Yeah. And I think too, not just in creating it, I see stuff and hear stuff all the time about, people will say like, oh, if you're reading sad books all the time, listening to sad music all the time, like you'll be sad too, you shouldn't do that. And I've never really gotten that, because I feel like I derive a lot of happiness from like the saddest art, just because, again, it's someone was able to create something so like wonderful from this initially bad thing,
Well,
so.
that's amazing. That's the poet Auden basically says that the mystery of art is that we don't know if it activates or pacifies us. So, that's like, if kids play violent video games, I think it turns them into violent kids, but it might alleviate them of this natural urge to be fighting, and then they're not violent. So we don't know what art does to us. That's the mystery. But and Bertolt Brecht says, I don't want art that pacifies me. I want art that activates me. Well, if it or puts you in a trance, it's like, well, art that puts you in a trance might in the long run activate you. That's why I like Auden saying that's the mystery, that we don't know what it is. We want, like you said, some people go, well, if you just read sad stuff, then you're going to be sad. No, maybe that alleviates you of sadness or makes you question it and think more about it.
Yeah.
So guide us a little on how your tipping point to be a writer, and then a journalist, and now a student pursuing becoming an educator. Where's your tipping points? You're like, that's what I want to do, that's my calling.
It's complicated. I don't feel like I have a specific tipping point. I think, in terms of writing, at some point when I was a kid, probably like maybe like 11, 12, like that kind of age range, I was reading enough that I was like, I'm gonna, try to write my own stories on sheets of loose leaf paper. And they were quite similar to the stories I was reading because I was 11. And I think that, combined with like, just being praised by teachers and whatnot for my writing in school, sort of put it into my brain that, I should be doing this. And so eventually I started writing in a way that was not just parroting the books I was reading on loose leaf paper, but, writing actual things. And I think journalism was just sort of not convenience, but just the fact that it was there. I think because by the time I got to high school, I was already, someone who people were telling me I could write, and I was like, feeling like that's something I should do, and it was something I enjoyed. It just seemed sort of natural to get involved with student journalism in high school, and then I continued on with it in college. And also just because it's a form of writing, even though I've done it, I did it for years, I always found it very difficult every single time I did it. And I think it was very good for me. And then in terms of, like pursuing an academic career in literature and all that, I think, again, like I said before, I started getting into reading in books very early. And then I think, especially in high school, I was very lucky to have, like the really good English teachers who, show you the right books and it like gets the wheels turning. And then I kind of had the same in college to an even greater extent. And I think in college, I saw what the literature professors who I admired so much there were doing and the kind of work they were doing. And I was like, I want to do that. So yeah, it just sort of snowballed throughout like my childhood and early adulthood. And it just, I think, I don't know exactly when, but it seemed at a certain point where I kind of felt like this is the only thing I can do. If I'm doing anything, it has to involve writing and literature somehow. That if I were to do anything that did not involve those things, I would not be living a life. I don't know. Which not to say that like a life where you're not doing that is not lived. I think I'm just talking about me specifically.
But it's like you're calling.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't like to call it calling because I feel very like, oh, it's my calling. Oh, that's
you don't like that word. Okay, that's fine. But how about compulsion? Do you have a compulsion to write?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's less a compulsion towards the act of writing, especially because I'm very inconsistent in my own fiction writing. But it's more a compulsion towards language and towards literature. Like if I'm not writing, I'm reading. Kind of thing, and it's a compulsion towards a certain sensibility, I think.
Okay, Zoe, a screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. When you were writing fiction, what role did intention play in your creative process?
I think a lot, in both good ways and bad ways. I think, when I write fiction, I'm like, I'm someone who's very more focused. This makes sense. Being a Joycean and being someone who likes Finnegan's Wake, I'm way more focused on sort of language and the aesthetic appearance of things than on things like plot. So I think in that sense, I'm very sort of, I feel like the intention behind what I'm doing with language is very important to me. And so in that sense, it's sort of a positive thing, but I think also in a negative sense, especially, having had the experience of, showing my work to others, being in writing workshops, that kind of thing. There's also this kind of ego-driven, if people read this the way that in a way that does not make sense to me, then I'm upset about it, which is not a good thing. And it goes against everything I feel about the literature I read. So it's sort of a blockage to creating good art for me.
Wow. So Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your reader when you're writing fiction?
Oh, constantly. I'll complain to people sometimes that like part of the reason why I'll freeze up when I try to write is because I always feel like I have people watching over my shoulder, not like in sort of a I always feel like as soon as it's on the page, I'm already thinking of the person over my shoulder reading it, the hypothetical person.
Well, let's ask that question. Now, let's sort of ooze into Joyce a little. Okay. Let's know your history of Joyce, but just staying on those two thoughts.
All right.
What role before you tell us your history of Joyce, where did you start and how would you answer that question in studying Joyce? What role did intention play in his creative process?
Oof. That's a good question.
I mean, we got this line. I want to keep the scholar critics busy. I mean, come on,
it's debatable that he actually said that. It's very from what I understand, he probably did not actually say
that. See, it doesn't matter if he said or not, or Elman's got a recording of him or whatever. Somebody wrote it down word for word. It doesn't matter because he's a charlatan in a way, and he might say something and not even know that that's not really but I'm saying your hunch. What do you think your hunch or guess?
I think intention was probably quite important to him. I think I'd say intention is important to every single artist because there's always intention there. But I think with Joyce, he I think it's important not in the sort of, the reader has to understand what I'm trying to do here and what everything means. I think it's important in the sense that I think his intention was to expect the reader to read it a certain way. In sort of, it's hard to explain.
You mean like not as casually, like to read it more mindfully?
Yeah, I think he expected the reader to be an active reader in a certain way. So to be an active participant in the text, to somewhat be involved in the act of creating the text in many ways. And I think that was, I don't think there's like, we can point to like a letter and say, oh, that was definitely his intention. But right. I think, looking at his work, that seems to be what's there to me.
When you said creating the text, did you mean creating the context or literally creating the text? What did that mean, creating the text?
More in terms of creating meaning and sort of bringing yourself to the text.
Meaning, yeah.
Yeah. It's more of an interpretive thing. I think like any good art, in my view, is art that asks you to be an active participant in that way to a certain extent. I think art fails when it just lets you sit back and think nothing.
Then
it is something else.
Yeah, that was good. So you're teaching me a lot. This is good. So, but how do you think he would have answered that? Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much do you think he was thinking of his reader when he was writing?
I think he was definitely thinking of his readers probably quite a bit. In a number of ways. I think, with him writing about Ireland and, not living there, and always having this sort of difficult relationship with Ireland, I think there's probably always, the kind of, seeing Ireland as the audience of his text in the back of his mind. I think he said something about Dubliners, like he wants the book to be sort of a mirror which the Irish people can like look at themselves into. And I think that's something we could say probably carried on through the later works. And I think too, just in a practical sense, he was sort of forced into thinking about the audience a lot with censorship and with the pushback against his work. Because, as much as you try to, separate yourself from thinking about an audience, if you're publishing your work like that, the audience is going to come knocking either way. And it sort of came knocking through sort of that censorship and all that.
Yeah, well, this is Frank Zappa says, I write music for myself. If other people like it, great. It's like, yeah, well, you're in my opinion, he's over romanticizing because he knows if he writes these lyrics or hits these notes, kids will buy his records and then he can make more music. So there's nothing wrong. And then, I always use this great line that Harold Bloom said, quoted Samuel Johnson. He says, anybody who, it basically says, everybody writes to sell their product. Joyce was writing to make money, but it's like, oh no, I just write to write, and if someone gives me some money, it's like once you're in a capitalist consumer society, how can you really separate that? You can sort of over romanticize it. Maybe there are. I mean, people just go, they don't care, they just make their art, and then if somebody gives them money, fine. If they don't, that's fine. I know there are artists like that, but what's your history? Did you start reading Joyce in high school or at Sarah Lawrence? And how did you come to this point? What you're actually doing now in Dublin?
Yeah. So forgive me for the length of this. but
Oh, no, that's what we're here for.
okay. So I technically my start with Joyce was in high school, but I didn't know it, because my junior year of high school, I was my English class that year was really great. I read a lot of great things in that class, and I think that was the teacher I had that year was a teacher in particular who really sort of got the wheels turning in my head that I should be doing this as like a career. Um, and we all of Joyce, the only Joyce we read in that class, we read The Dead, Araby, and Eveline, all from Dubliners. And I really liked them at the time, but they didn't like super stick out to me, because it was just sort of in this larger mess of great literature we were reading. And I was also exposed to another one of my favorite writers that year, and I think my focus was more on that writer at the time.
Who was that? What was that writer's name?
David Foster Wallace.
Oh, really? Cool. All right.
Yeah.
I was going to guess who I was going to guess, Zoe.
Who?
No, you guess who I was going to guess.
I don't know.
Virginia Woolf.
Virginia Woolf. Oh, that's funny. I actually didn't read any Virginia Woolf till college. I love her.
Yeah.
But didn't. Yeah, I didn't read it.
It's like, you give these arguments. Who's better, Joyce or Virginia Woolf? Okay, so you got it.
They're so different.
So they were telling you, they exposed you to David Foster Wallace through school. You didn't get that on your own.
Yeah, well, basically what happened was we had these like on top of like the regular reading that the whole class did. We had these like periodical assignments of you pick whatever book you want to read and write a thing on it, and usually there were suggestions. And the whole class was reading Hamlet at the time, and my teacher gave us a list of suggestions of books that had ties to Hamlet. And he said, if any of you want a challenge, go and read Infinite Jest. And I was like, I want a challenge. So I did, and it completely rewired my brain.
Wow. Okay, hold 1 second.
Okay.
What's your take on the movie? Yes, no, or so-so?
The movie of Infinite Jest?
Yeah.
Since when is there a movie?
Oh,
this is news to me.
It's the Napoleon guy. It's Joaquin Phoenix.
I have never heard of this. I'm very surprised.
Oh, yeah. Well, it goes to the great joke. McLuhan and Hitchcock's favorite joke is two goats are eating celluloid film coming out of a film can, and one goat says to the other, the book was better. So anyways, at some point, if you see Infinite Jest, I'd love to get. So you read Infinite Jest, and this same teacher was turning you in or giving you Joyce also?
Yeah, but again, only those few stories from Dubliners, and I enjoyed them, but they didn't like really stick in terms of I have to go read more Joyce now. But then I remember my freshman year of college, I didn't read any Joyce, but a professor who I had for a year-long class, who was also my advisor, I was very close to, he was very into Joyce, and he didn't put any Joyce on our syllabus, but he's always, talking about Joyce, and I was getting interested. And then sophomore year, I signed up for one class where we were going to read Portrait of the Artist, and then I signed up for another class where we were going to read Ulysses. And the latter I signed up because I started hearing about Ulysses, and I'm like, I want to try that. And the timing worked out well that like the portrait class read it like a month before we started Ulysses. So I had sort of a good leading into it. And then the professor that I read it with, he's not, Joyce is not his main thing. The class was on sort of epic poetry, and Ulysses was, even though Ulysses is prose, it was brought into that because it is sort of an epic, and it's obviously, the Homer connection, the Dante connection, all that. And I had like another Infinite Jest type experience where it rewired my brain. And then the next year I didn't read any Joyce. I was in England for the year, didn't read any Joyce, but I went to Ireland for a few days and went to all the Joyce stuff and had like a moment. And then I went back, took another class where we read Ulysses again. I got really way more into it. started looking at the Wake a bit, and then I was at the point where I knew I was very interested in Joyce and also very interested in literary modernism in general. And I was applying to master's programs, and most of them were just standard sort of MA in English programs. But I also applied to the MPhil in Irish Writing at Trinity. And I was sort of on the fence at that time of whether I wanted to focus on sort of Joyce in sort of my grad school studies, or if I wanted to focus on writers like Gertrude Stein, Juna Barnes, because they were also a big point of interest for me. And I kind of told myself, whichever master's programs I get into, if I get into the Trinity MPhil in Irish Writing and that ends up being, the best choice out of what I get accepted to, then I'm going to sort of go the Joyce route. And then that's what happened. I moved to Dublin. Obviously we studied more than just Joyce, but I did my MPhil dissertation on Joyce, and I just, got so into Joyce that year that I was like, I'm just going to keep on the Joyce train and do a PhD, because I think being in Dublin and being in a program where I was being taught by a seasoned Joycean was very much showed me that this is like what I want to do. That was also the year I got introduced to Sweeney's, and I think that element of it too really sort of cemented that for me.
Yeah, that was, go back for a second. So you said Gertrude Stein and you said Barnes. I missed the other person you said.
Oh, Juna Barnes.
How do you spell that? J?
It's Djuna.
Djuna.
Yeah, she was an American modernist writer, but she, like many American modernists, lived in Paris for a long time. She was friends with Joyce, actually.
Really?
She was one of the few people allowed to call him Jim. She like interviewed him. It was a whole thing. I would say her most famous work is Nightwood, which I think anyone who enjoys Ulysses will enjoy Nightwood. They're very different books, but I think sort of, there's a similar kind of sensibility there.
Okay, that was good. So yeah, because Stein and you pronounced her Djuna?
Juna.
Oh, Juna. You don't pronounce the D.
Yeah, the D is silent.
Okay. So then are you all this way becoming more Wakean, or are you all of Joyce? Is like, what is your dissertation? What is your PhD study on exactly?
Well, my thesis is actually on sort of Joycean reader communities, specifically non-academic reader communities, or communities that involve non-academic.
Whoa. Oh dear. Well, we got bumped off there for a second, and Zoe will probably jump back on. And in the meantime, I'll tell you that when she says Sweeney's Pharmacy, she is talking about a drugstore in Dublin that Joyce talks about in his books, in Buying Lemon Soap there. And for several years, they've conducted reading workshops through this venue, and they have been reading Finnegan's Wake on Zoom, and that's how I met Zoe. So hang in there, and I'm going to ask her to re-enter and see if there was a server problem or what. And here we go.
Hi, I'm so sorry, my internet cut out.
No, that's all right, Zoe. This is fun. But so you did you find yourself now getting knee deep into through Sweeney's and this Joyce's reading community? Did you find yourself getting more into Joyce complete, or you're more of a Finnegan's Wake or more of a Ulysses person?
I'd say I am a combination Ulysses Finnegan's Wake person.
Really?
in the style of a combination Pizza Hut Taco Bell. Um, I yeah, I think but in different ways, I think I think I'm fully a Ulysses person at this point, but I think I'm still becoming a Wakian,
Yeah.
not in the sense that like, oh, I didn't like it before it, but more in the, I have a larger level of just sort of, there's a larger level of mystery there for me, which I think is the case for everyone. And I think, I connect with the two works in a very different way. But in terms of, what I focus on, like logistically in the work I do, and then also just, if I'm picking up one of the four major Joyce works to read, which one am I going to pick up? It's sort of, I'm combination Ulysses, Finnegan's Wake. Not to say that I don't love Dubliners and Portrait. I do. But I feel like, sometimes Dubliners and Portrait kind of felt like the training wheels for me to like become a Ulysses Finnegan's Wake person.
Yeah.
So I do love revisiting them, but they don't like hit in the same way. That
In your thesis is Joyce's reading communities.
Yeah.
This
So
is just to suss this out, but let me set up. I became intrigued with Joyce because my friend was going to a Finnegan's Wake reading club in New York. And I said, well, I'm going to start my own Finnegan's Wake reading club in Venice, California, like 28 years ago. And it worked because I want to read the book. I had really never read much Joyce. In fact, I was raised in front of a TV. I'm not a reader. I know how to talk about books, and I got straight A's in school, so I can bullshit my way through all this. But, I really got into the Wake deeply through both that sort of readers community and the academic mush together. And then I just had this revelation in the last couple months is that Joyce started like the first Finnegan's Wake reading club with that book in 1929. 10 years before the book comes out, he's starting a Finnegan's Wake reading club with William Carlos Williams and Sam Beckett. And then the book comes out, and then supposedly 47 is when T.S. Eliot started the Finnegan's Wake reading club in New York. And so are you talking about Joyce reading communities as Wake reading groups, or all of them? There's Ulysses and other.
I think Ulysses and the Wake. I'm focusing on both. Not really as much on groups that read Dubliners or a Portrait, mostly because groups that read Dubliners and a Portrait are far fewer in number. Most Joyce reading groups, they either read Ulysses or they read Finnegan's Wake. And something that, a sort of element of that is that, Ulysses reading groups tend to take a different approach than Wake reading groups do, just because of the how the texts are so different from one another. So that's something I'm kind of looking at. But
let's hold on that, Zoe, for a second, because did Joyce specify? Because this woman who interviewed me the other day for the press, she goes, did he require? I says, well, Joyce required people to read Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people. Now, I don't have the exact wording, but I know wasn't there somewhere he encouraged you have to read it out loud, or you should read it out loud with a group of people? Was that just specific to the Wake? And what did he say? Or did he also kind of hint at that or require it for Ulysses?
I think he only, if I remember correctly, I think he only said something like that for the Wake specifically.
Yeah.
From what I remember, I don't remember the exact quote, but I know that there is a quote out there. But I don't think he said that for Ulysses as well. But I think even if he didn't say it for Ulysses, I think it does. Ulysses is conducive to it.
Right, because I go to these Ulysses events on Bloomsday, and sometimes they even read a little of the Wake, and I go, you can't do this unless scrolling the text, like in opera they scroll the text, or you got to have the text in front of you on the wake. Maybe
Oh, yeah.
Ulysses, you don't have to, because it's been
Yeah.
forever. They've had great actors read Ulysses for 2 days on the radio. But the wake, you have to have the text in
Mhm.
front. You have to see how the words are written, in my opinion,
Mhm.
and I think that's a big thing with what is your approach? What are you trying to reveal about Joyce reading communities in your thesis? Is there a goal?
Um, there are a number of different goals. I think, first of all, I'm trying to sort of, because the thing with Joyce reading groups is, there are a lot of just reading groups and book clubs out there generally, and there are a lot of others that are, devoted to a singular writer. But in terms of ones devoted to a singular writer, Joyce really stands out in terms of like numbers and prominence. There just seems to be way more Joyce reading groups than like Virginia Woolf reading groups. And it's like, why is that? I'm kind of looking at that. And I'm also looking at sort of the idea of reading collectively. Because I think I was talking about before about, Joy sort of wanting his readers to be active readers and to, be a part of the creative process. I think sort of building off that, I think the text not only asks for that, but it also asks you to sort of connect with other readers. I think it's a text that is really conducive to both Ulysses and the Wake are texts that are very conducive to that. And I think, you know, I think a lot of things about reading with a group, reading with other people, not just talking about a book, but actually reading it with other people, is very, very different than the experience of just sitting and reading quietly on your own, or even reading out loud on your own. So I'm kind of looking at how that sort of functions. And then I'm also looking at sort of the relationship between these kind of non-academic Joycean communities and the scholarly Joyce world. Because as I'm sure you've seen, being involved in the Joyce world yourself, there's a lot of overlap between those two sorts of camps of readers. And there's a lot of interaction there. And some of it is positive, but some of it is also sometimes negative. There are certain like hostilities between those two types of readers. And I'm kind of looking at, how does that function? How can we change that kind of thing? How can non-academic readers benefit Joyce scholars, and how can Joyce scholars benefit non-academic readers?
Oh, that's really
Yeah.
good, because that's like, you know who Terence McKenna is?
I don't actually.
You should look into Terence McKenna, because
I will.
he's a science guy who
Mhm.
kind of let boomers take drugs vicariously no more, because he made
Mm.
it sound like it's legitimate to take psychedelics before Michael Pollan and all this new psychedelic resurgence recently. Terence McKenna put out a tape. You can hear it on YouTube. It's a 45-minute audio cassette about him in Finnegan's Wake, and then he
Mhm.
did one about him in McLuhan. And
Mhm.
basically, kids who go to Burning Man are like, free-spirited artist druggy kids, and they go there and read Finnegan's Wake because Terence
Mhm.
McKenna told them to. So I get a lot of younger people interested in the Wake because they heard Terence McKenna talk about it.
Mm.
It's sort of like a psychedelic experience. And
Mhm.
so that's weird, because you don't think of Burning Man kids as being academic, though probably most of them are rich art professors anyways. But it is fun because, me not really being an academic,
Mhm.
I've had a slew of a range of people come through my Wake group in 28 years,
Mhm.
from academic to street people to homeless people to, all different types, young and old. And
Mhm.
so it's interesting that Joyce crosses over like that. Whereas he's, most people are like, that's difficult. I
Mhm.
like, don't use the word difficult. It's not
Yeah.
difficult. difficult. Get over it. It's because the cliche is that it's difficult, so they demonized it, you know. So that's important when you're tackling, and I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Thank you. Yeah, the difficulty is it's a very big point for me. Whenever I hear like another Joycean like say anything that implies that it's just inherently difficult, I'm kind of right there going, we think it's difficult, but it doesn't have to be.
And
Pretty much,
Sweeney's is proof.
yeah.
What happens at Sweeney's of all, because I go to Austin, Texas
Hmm.
twice a month. I go to New York, Finnegan's Wake twice a month. I do Venice once a month, and I go to Sweeney's 4 times a month.
Hmm.
So that's all Finnegan's Wake. And Sweeney's is actually the best because these people wander in and they're tourists. And they're going to Sweeney's because it's a tourist trap, isn't it? I mean, what is Sweeney's? Is it like it's sort of like a tourist? Huh?
Sweeney's is everything all at once.
Right, but I mean, it's sort of like how do tourists happen to wander in there? Because it's a Joyce landmark, and they
Hmm.
wander in there because I've heard of James Joyce, and I can buy the lemon soap or whatever. And so then they have these people read Finnegan's Wake who have never read the Wake before, out of the blue, and they read it beyond perfect. And
Hmm.
it's like, have you ever read the Wake? No. How did you know how to read it? Because
Hmm.
they didn't, it's hard to read the Wake without feeling you're stumbling.
Yeah.
These people who are actors
Hmm.
and poets kind of get it. You just go with the flow.
Yeah.
But that's what I like about Sweeney's is it has that magnet to bring in the normal person in a
Hmm.
way. They know a little. And then the fact that they don't psychoanalyze it, the majority of the meeting is just reading it. And
Yeah.
then because all the other groups are, trying to decipher and break down the text too much. Like my group for 28 years, as soon as I started reading the Sweeney's, I goes, this is stupid. I've done it wrong for 28 years. But I'm not going to, my people have said, don't change, keep it that
Mhm.
way, and then go to Sweeney's. But, tell me about what happened with you and Sam Slow. Did you pick him is he your thesis advisor?
He
And,
is. Yeah.
and how did that happen? Did you pick him or did it just fall into place? That's what happened.
Well, I asked him to supervise my PhD because doing the MPhil at Trinity, he obviously with our class on Joyce, he was the one to teach it because he's the resident Joycean in Trinity. And then how it kind of works on that program is near the end of the academic near the start of summer, you sort of submit a dissertation proposal to sort of the people running the master's course, and then they sort of pair you with whichever lecturer would be like best suited to supervise what you're doing. And since my proposal was very much on Joyce, it made sense for Sam to supervise that. And I had such a good experience working with him that time, that literally I think like the last meeting I had with it, because I was working on my thing remotely. I was like back in New York working on my dissertation, and I think if I remember correctly, I think like the very last meeting I had with him about my dissertation before I submitted it, I asked if he would supervise my PhD, and he agreed. And so I applied to multiple universities for PhD programs just in case, but it was always sort of like, I want to just go back to Trinity and work with Sam again. And that's what happened. So yeah, it was just sort of, I kind of happened by chance, but I, also not kind of thing.
And so was there actually a choice? Were there several or many professors at Trinity who are kind of Joycean leaning, or is he just the one exclusive? Is there several?
No, I think so. I think I haven't met every single faculty member within the School of English, but I think there are a few who like, have done work on Joyce, but Joyce isn't their main thing. Sam is the only one that I know of who Joyce is like his main thing.
Have you read how Joyce wrote Finnegan's Wake? Have you read that book he edited?
I actually have not.
Oh my God, I've had that on my shelf for so long. It's just such a title. How could anyone write a book, How Joyce Wrote Finnegan's Wake? But my what I know is that what I heard was that it took 30 years, and it's not just him. It's many people wrote, it's he edited. But I'm really curious, Zoe, when I interviewed him with all these questions, I asked him a question I'll ask you at the end is, how did Joyce shape your behavior? And you know what Sam said? He said, it made me more tolerant. Now, he says, I don't know if I'm succeeding, but what is it? What you just knowing Sam as you do, what does that mean to you? It made me more tolerant.
I mean, like, obviously I can't speak for Sam's experience with it, but I think, because I feel like I've heard people say that about Joyce and specifically about Ulysses. Quite like I've heard other people sort of say things along those lines. And I think, kind of going back to sort of, what I was talking about with, Joyce asking for certain things from the reader and sort of all that kind of stuff. I think a major thing that Joyce does is he asks you to read in an entirely new way.
Yeah.
He kind of, I think, less so with Portrait and Dubliners, but I think with Ulysses and then even further with Finnegan's Wake, he asks you to sort of abandon a lot of the rules of reading that you were taught when you were taught how to read, and sort of figure out a new way of doing it. And I think, having to rethink something so fundamental as reading really opens your mind to a lot of things.
That is heavy. Yeah. That's really good, because that's Harold Bloom said that you absorb your influences, then you abandon them. So it was like, I have this new theory about Joyce is, you know what BVDs are? They're a type of underwear. BVDs. Okay. I mean, it's been around for many, many years. And Joyce talks about underwear and BVDs in The Wake. And to me, that's Joyce's influences. Bruno, Dante, and Vico, BVD. Oh. It's far-fetched, but it is funny. He's like, how did you, James Joyce, how did you absorb these three biggies and then abandon them?
Yeah, it's like Finnegan's Wake is the great book of coincidence. Yeah, I would say, it's like all the things that one can find in The Wake. Obviously, there are things that we can say like, oh, Joyce was definitely referencing this thing and this thing and this thing. But with things like that, it's Joyce probably didn't have that in mind, but it's still there, and it's like a great coincidence that you can find meaning in. And I think,
well, that's another huge issue, the whole coincidence thing.
Yeah, but I think
huge.
People like to,
yeah,
people like to sort of sometimes frame the coincidence thing as a problem, like, say like, oh, you can't say that Joyce is referencing this thing because, it didn't exist when he was alive, blah, blah, blah. And like, logistically, that is true. However, I think because Joyce is giving the reader space to be an active participant and to be a creator, that the meaning you find there, even if it's something Joyce could never have conceived of, like himself, it's still meaningful. It still matters because you, the reader, are important to the text. The text doesn't exist without you. So the things you're finding in it that Joyce, wouldn't have known about, it's there for you, so it matters. You can't go into an academic paper and be like, oh, Joyce was definitely referencing this thing that happened in the 70s, because that, he couldn't have been doing that. but that's something you can find for yourself in there, you
You
know?
can make, I love your thing of saying making the reader an active participant, because that's what he's doing. Because I have
Mhm.
many Joyceans in my life who don't want to entertain the wake as being predictive. And it's like, that's all right. I can understand that they don't like that. I mean,
Mhm.
you know, my wife and I getting married in Paoli, Indiana, deciding the day we read the page in our wake group that was the week where we go, okay, we're going to get married in Paoli, Indiana. And we read this page. I think I forgot the number, but I can look it up. And there's 3 references to marrying on that page. And
Wow.
it's spelled Paoli, exactly like
Mhm.
Paoli. So what? It's a
Yeah.
coincidence. But it's like, it's amazing that we find this all the time. I mean, the day Princess Di was killed or died, there
Mhm.
were like 4 references. The day she died, we were reading the wake, and everybody in our group were like shaking each other's shoulders. Can you believe that? You know, there was like a
Mhm.
bridge, car under all this stuff. And, you know, they go, that's just a coincidence. You could read anything. But this is 2 things major you brought up there is Martha Graham said artists aren't ahead of their times, they are their times. So if all times are happening now,
Mhm.
which is what Frank Zappa and Joyce said, then that's what it is. It's just this zeitgeist, and you're you know, bouncing off and reflecting and mirroring and echoing. But mid-career, McLuhan said something amazing. He took the medium as the message, his most famous aphorism, medium is the massage, and he updated it. He says, no, it's no longer medium is massage. He says, now it's the user is the content.
Mm.
That is what active readership I'm getting from what you're saying, that
Yeah.
the user is the content, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, books don't exist without the readers. I mean, like, they exist physically, but, like, they, you know, they can't do what they are meant to do without someone reading them.
Yeah.
And I think Finnegan's Wake, it just, you know, takes that sort of reality to its extreme. And I like to call both Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake, but Finnegan's Wake more so a choose your own adventure book.
A
Um,
what?
a
Choose
choose your own adventure book.
choose your own adventure book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where you can, you know, the text is there, and you are given the freedom to kind of do what you want with it, often within certain parameters, but
Yeah.
it's, you know, it's very much you make Finnegan's Wake what it is.
Yeah. The other book, watch for this book, The Negative Dialectics of Poodle Play.
Mm,
It's by Ben Watson. He's a
okay.
he's a Marxist. He's an English guy who came out of Marx and Theodore Adorno, you know,
Mhm,
negative dialectics. But he basically compares all of Frank Zappa's work with Shakespeare and James Joyce. And, you know, it's deep into how he interweaves Zappa with Finnegan's Wake, especially.
mhm,
In 1966, Frank Zappa put on his first album, I'm influenced by these people, and he listed James Joyce. Now,
mm,
whether he ever read Finnegan's Wake or Ulysses, we don't know for sure, but there's a lot. Like, I have a list of Wake and Zappa crossovers that are amazing. There's a
mhm,
huge list. Like Zoo Lures is one. That's the name of a Zappa album, and Zoo Lures appears in the Wake, and it just is French for oh shit or holy shit. But the other thing I want to say to you, Zoe, which is you're bringing up,
mhm,
really refreshing for me, I appreciate your time, is that Joyce called his work Applied Aquinas.
mm.
And McLuhan eventually called his work Applied Joyce. It's hard to get McLuhan. It seems
Mhm.
easy. But he said, if you don't read all of Joyce in The Symbolist, you're not going to get me. And it's easy to kind of misinterpret McLuhan, and that's all right. Just getting him enough. It's just like it's easy to kind of misinterpret Joyce because both of them are like charlatans and they're just putting this stuff out and saying use it however you want. You know, they're not telling you miss the point. In my opinion, when you make art, it's no longer yours. It's the user. They can do whatever they want with it.
Yeah.
But I had a friend see a John Jost movie once years ago, experimental filmmaker, and he went up to Jost and says, "Your film made me join the Occupy movement. You know, thank you." And John Jost went, "Don't blame me." So, you know, we went 90 minutes. So if you don't mind, let's plan a part 2, like 2 or 3 months down the road. Because we only got through a few of the questions. But why don't we go into this question for a second, staying on this Joyce thing? Or if you can stick around, we could go a little longer on Joyce right now. Is that all right? You got time?
Okay. Yeah, I got time.
Okay, so this one is staying on the McLuhan. McLuhan probed Finnegan's Wake, saying artists dream awake. And it's not to sound elitist, but everybody has this ability to create these scenarios in the middle of the night. And artists do that while they're awake. You know, so it's like they're dreaming awake. So what usually this is what I ask is, how have dreams played a role in your creative process? You can go into that in this idea that the wake is not about a dream, it is a dream. Any thoughts on that? Just the topic of dreaming in the wake. Yeah,
I mean, in the wake, I'd say I would agree with the idea that it is the dream rather than is about the dream, because I think, an essential element of dreams is that I can only speak from my own dreaming experience, but they never quite feel like reality, even when they feel real, and you have the moment where you wake up and it takes a moment to realize it didn't happen, that it's always this sort of like altered state of perception. That is far messier and far more confusing than anything you perceive in your waking life. And I think, the language of Finnegan's Wake reflects that, because you can't fully, portray a dream in sort of standard language.
You can.
Yeah. And I think, to me, I think that's why people don't like it when, people tell them about their dreams. Like, no one wants to hear someone else's dream, because when you filter it into like you're just telling a story about something that happened, it loses its significance in a lot of ways, because the medium is the message. Like, the medium of dreaming is so specific and hard to recreate with standard language that like the significance of it is lost when you're just saying, oh yeah, this and this happened in my dream. Isn't that, and then you also asked sort of how dreams influence me and sort of my work. I think, like, creatively, I've never been one to like have a dream and be like, oh, let me turn what happened in this dream into a story or anything like that. But I think, and this ties into sort of memory, which we were talking about way before. I think I this is an experience I have, and I don't know if it's an experience everyone has, but I would guess it probably is. That even though, I don't remember a lot of my dreams, or, I only remember them for like the day after, I think throughout my life, I've had certain dreams where they were somehow memorable enough that I remember them years later. And it comes to the point where they almost feel like memories, even though I know they're not really memories, but it feels the same as a memory. And I think the sort of feelings of those kind of dream memories are feelings that like I have sort of channeled while writing, used while writing before.
You
Because
channel that. You
yeah,
channel that in reading consciously or unconsciously?
I think both, because I think,
Oh,
yeah, because I think because I'd say like memory usually you have feelings associated with memories, and I would say it's sort of the same with dream kind of memory sort of things. And I think those are feelings that shape your perspective and how you see things. So sort of unconsciously, like those feelings are shaping my perspective, but then consciously, if I'm sort of, thinking about what to write or sort of what kind of tone to set for what I'm writing, if that sort of memory crosses my mind, that's something I can use consciously as well.
yeah.
So it's a bit of both.
That is really good. There's a couple things, Zoe.
Okay.
One is I read this thing once and I says, that's Finnegan's Wake. There's certain things I go, that's the Wake. If you ever
Mm.
read Zadie Smith's review of the movie The Clock,
Mm.
the review of books, read it.
Okay.
This is the Wake. It's her
Mm.
review of a 24-hour movie. I says, this is
Oh.
the Wake. Also, Todd Hayes' movie, I'm Not There, the Bob Dylan film. If you
Mhm.
listen to his commentary track on the DVD, I goes,
Mhm.
this is the Wake. There's certain things that typify, but the one that really got me was I read that American Indians, indigenous cultures, would
Mhm.
go from one tent to the other and go, like, I'd go up to you and I go, oh, well, Zoe, what did you dream last night? And you would start trying to put it in your words, like standard language.
Mhm.
Well, there was a canoe and then, there was this and that. And then I would ask another question. And I became the co-creator of your dream by
Mm.
the questions that I asked you.
Interesting.
So that's what we are doing with the Wake. We're
Mhm.
co-creators of the Wake because it's not in standard language.
Mhm.
And so you can't describe a dream, but
Yeah.
you can try to by having other people work with you. It's
Mhm.
almost like we're doing therapy with each other. I'm telling you, when we having Finnegan's Wake groups, especially in Texas, you will
Mhm.
love this. This is perfect for your PhD. This is like we'll read it,
Mhm.
then we'll go into this somewhere along the line. We'll go, well, why did Joyce do this? So first it's like content, then
Mhm.
it's motive, and then it's all poo poo caca. Well, did you read? That's a reference to masturbation. That's his poop, and he's drawing this poop on his arms. It's like this is like this amazing, like Jungian kind of therapy that
Mhm.
you were going through by doing it as a group. And then I loved your learn. You can't describe it in standard language. That's the key. That's really a key phrase. The other one you described there was, have you ever studied lucid dreaming?
No, I mean, I know what it is, but I've never
Yeah,
studied it.
look into it a little, because what it is, I haven't studied deeply, or hypnotism, Erickson and hypnotism. Duncan can tell you about Erickson
Mhm.
and hypnotism, and it's really close to this, I think. Lucid dreaming is like you found a couple dreams in your life over the years that kind of stuck in your memory consciously or unconsciously. So then lucid dreaming is when you kind of get into that almost falling asleep state. You're almost daydreaming.
Mhm.
You could like, oh, take me back to that hillside with the flowers.
Mhm.
In you're kind of half asleep and you lead yourself into that setting. That's
Yeah.
kind of lucid dreaming. And
Mhm.
Tim Leary said, if you uh kind of master that, not master it, but practice it, lucid dreaming, that when you die, you can direct your path. Because supposedly your body dies and your consciousness kind of lives for another 6 minutes. And you can sort of direct your path on where you're going after you die. Like, oh, I want to return to that hillside, or I want to return to my friends, or I want to return to my Finnegan's Wake reading club. So it is funny that the statement you talked about, the altered state, also begs one of my questions: is perception reality?
I think so. Because I feel like it like yes and no, because I think it's the only way we can understand reality. So there's no real way of knowing whether it's reality or not. So we just have to assume it is, and hope for the best.
My friend made a fake experimental film, Coleman Miller. I says, is perception reality? He says, that's all you got. But Lily Tomlin said it best. She goes, reality is just a collective hunch.
Yeah.
Well, here's Jean Cocteau also, who's, there in Paris when Joyce and Gertrude Stein. It's a filmmaker's privilege to be able to allow a large number of people to dream the same dream, to dream the same dreaming together. So we're sort of, and to show us, moreover, the optical illusions of unreality with the rigor of realism. So we kind of think that the dream is real, but like you said, it was like, what did you say? It never quite feels reality, but it does a dream feel like it's real?
I think it can in the moment.
Yeah.
And I think too, I was talking before about like how certain dreams that stick with you kind of feel like memories. I think in that sense as well, I think it is certainly possible, if a dream feels like a memory, to sort of have kind of develop the sense that it like was real or felt real enough. I think like, people talk about like things like false memories and stuff like that. And I think, I think it's certainly possible for like dreams to sort of create false memories. I've certainly had moments where like things that I remember as being like, I know logically they're dreams. I still have a moment where I'm like, but that felt really real. Am I sure that didn't happen?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is Finnegan's Wake real?
Yeah. I hope so.
I hope so. That was good. No, you were confident there, and now you said, I hope so. Yeah. I love that question. I think there's nothing more real than Finnegan's Wake. I mean, in a way, but in another way, it's like such a like, well, it's sort of like Subgenius, pull the wool over your own eyes. So how much, I know it's a stupid question, but how much in general do you get the wake, and how much in general do you think Joyce got the wake? I mean, from 0 to 100%, just your guess.
I'd say I get like 3% of it, which I may be generous. And then with Joyce, I don't really know, because like you have to sort of define what there is to get with the wake. I think, we were talking before about how like, it's this book of coincidence, and people find things in it that like Joyce certainly did not actively put in there for whatever logistical temporal reason. So if you are, it depends on whether you're talking about the wake, in its immediate writing or its, you know, immediate publication versus the wake as it exists in our society now, how it's, you know, become a thing that, you know, resonates with readers in ways that Joyce could not have imagined. I think in terms of like, you know, the wake as it existed as Joyce wrote it and its publication, I'd say a very high percentage, maybe like 85% kind of thing. But
Oh,
I think,
good.
but
I
I think,
like
but I think if you present, if you were able to somehow present Joyce with the Finnegan's Wake of 2023, it would be a much lower number because so much has been added to it by its readers. And the more readers it has and the more time passes, the further it goes away from Joyce's full understanding.
Okay, this is that you just helped me add a new question. So what I should say is, how much did Joyce get the wake when it came out in 39? You're
Yeah.
saying 85%. How much? Yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah.
How much does Joyce get the wake from heaven right now? His percentage in today's, you know, so you're saying it would be lower than 85 now.
Yeah, and I think, well, it also depends on the exact context of this hypothetical scenario where
Yeah.
Joyce could, you know about the wake being read in 2023, because I think there's a difference between like, is it, you know, Joyce, he only has his knowledge from his lifetime and he's being presented with the wake in 2023, or he somehow has knowledge of how history has developed and how society has changed since then, seeing the wake in 2023. I was thinking of it more as, you know, Joyce with his knowledge of his lifetime, if you just got in somehow we're able to, you know, bring a Joyce reading group or something through a time machine and go back in time to you know, Joyce in 1940 and be like, you know, this is what we're doing with it. I think
He would get it less.
he'd get it. Oh, definitely, yeah. No, the fact that
because he's yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, no, the fact that nowadays, you know, I can sit and read it in 2023 and I'll find words in it where I'm like, "Hot, that reminds me of something I saw on TikTok."
Yeah.
Like, you know, would be so outside of his realm of understanding.
Yeah.
So, you know, yeah, I think because of the way people have changed and the way society has changed and technology and all of that, you know, it's become something that would be far less recognizable to him.
That's, you know, you have to talk to Nathan Wallace, who's in
Okay.
the Texas group. He
Mm.
teaches. He wrote a book and he teaches in Ohio, and he
Mhm.
did Joyce on Twitter for about he did the wake on Twitter for a couple years.
Oh, he was the running that.
Yes, you should talk
Okay.
to him because when I told him, Joyce, you know, I learned this.
Mhm.
Joyce satirized the information overload we're swirling in. He's like,
Mhm.
what? I says, that's what it is.
Yeah.
He's satirizing this information, and it's really the first thing that McLuhan published in a book is that read the intro to The
Mhm.
Mechanical Bride. And
Mm.
basically it's simple. He said, Edgar Allan Poe, The Descent into the Maelstrom. The sailor gets smushed by the horrible storm at sea, and the boat parts are all broken, and
Mhm.
they're swirling around in a whirlpool. And
Mhm.
he's going to go swoop down to his death. But instead, the sailor studies the patterns of the broken boat parts and swoops his way out of death.
Mhm.
So we are swirling in this whirlpool of sensory overload. I mean, late 50s when McLuhan wrote it, and
Mhm.
especially now.
Yeah.
But if we study the patterns, we can swoop our way out of it. We can
Mhm.
use that breakdown into a breakthrough.
Mhm.
Because see, I would say when people are, you know, I mean, you should have heard PJ say how much because I haven't done all these questions with him, but I really want to. But there was one moment at the end of one of Sweeney's sessions where I got to ask him a couple questions. It was just me and him, and I wish I would have taped it. I have the notes, but I probably already buried the notes. I says, "How much do you get the wake, and how much did Joyce get the wake?" And he was like, "Well, Joyce got it 80 and I get it 75," or he was much more generous.
Yeah.
Because people want to be humble. But see, I think you get the wake way more than 3% because you keep coming back and reading it. Otherwise, you would go, "Well, no, that's stupid," because that's like the typical Joycean intellectual literati you meet at a cocktail party. You go, "Have you ever read Joyce?" And they go, "Oh yeah, Ulysses is great." "Have you ever read Finnegan's Wake?" "He went too far with Finnegan's Wake." They always sort of poo-poo Finnegan's Wake. And you ever read Michael Chabon? You know that guy?
I've heard of him, but I haven't read him.
Check him out. He wrote this essay. He's really big. He's like another American writer who flipped over Joyce. You know the other one? Tom Robbins. You know Tom Robbins' Skinny Legs?
I don't actually.
Oh, you should check out. Tom Robbins is a really popular author with teenage women, and then he got huge because he did 20 books that have sold huge. He's a deadhead kind of stoner dude who really made it. He's like pre-David Foster Wallace kind of guy. He made it big. He reads a line from Finnegan's Wake every night before he goes to bed. So these pop guys realize Joyce is important, and then they go, "Well, yeah, Ulysses is important, but the wake, do you get the wake?" That's like another step. And Michael Chabon wrote this article. It's in like New York Review of Books or something. It came out like 5 years ago. You should definitely read it online. And he basically says, "I loved Ulysses, or Ulysses is important, and I never gave the wake a chance, and now I did, and I realize it's great." So it's like it helps legitimize the wake to people. Well, or you go like Patti Smith likes the wake, and Philip K. Dick likes the wake, and they go, "Oh, well, then it must be." In order to. The other person is read Peter Quadrino's article on the pantheon of wake. So it's everybody who's been influenced by the wake. And my favorite in there is Brie Larson. What's her name? The movie. Brie Larson was asked in People magazine once, "Well, what are you doing now?" And she said, "I'm going to read Finnegan's Wake." I mean, just to have women across America treat her as a Marvel, a feminine kind of strong Marvel role model, to say she's reading the wake is like, it's good for us, And Johnny Depp and Jack White and all these people's like, so what? Okay. So anyways, sorry to go on the rant so much, but now that you read Finnegan's Wake at Sweeney's, what would you raise you're getting its percentage from 3 to what?
You might say this is still being humble, but I'd say maybe like 15.
Okay, 15. That's
good.
Because,
I still like I've Finnegan's Wake was the like obvious for same with a lot of people, the last of the the 4 major Joyce works that I read. And the first time I read it, I read it on my own, and I didn't do it out loud. Like I did, I did everything wrong. And I think, at first, like I appreciated, like I enjoyed it, but I was also very intimidated by it. So I kind of put up my guard against it a little bit, and then sort of leaned into Ulysses a bit more. And I've, in the past few years, I think starting with getting involved in Sweeney's, and then also, with the research I'm doing now, I have been letting my guard down with the wake. And so I still feel like I'm getting to know it. Even though I've, it's been a few years since I read it for the first time, I still feel like, I'd say for me, the difference between Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake is Ulysses is an old friend and Finnegan's Wake is someone I just met in a pub. And
that is a great way to put it. I love that. Well, Zoe, it's really been a pleasure. You really enlightened me and taught me a lot, and I appreciate your time. And I'll send you an email. We'll set up part 2. It'll be like April, May, or somewhere next year. And I'm sure we'll have a whole bunch of new stuff to talk about, but we only got through barely a third of the questions anyways. Wow. But I love the Finnegan's Wake tangent because it really was fun and it taught me a lot. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, and I hope that this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever. Thank you so much, Zoe.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.